The clatter of my ceramic mug hitting the hardwood floor echoed through the kitchen, hot coffee splashing across my bare feet, but I barely noticed the scalding liquid. My eyes were fixed on the letter in my trembling hands, its contents shattering my world into 1,000 pieces. "Rachel? Everything okay down there?" Mike's voice drifted from upstairs, tinged with mild concern. I swallowed hard, quickly stuffing the letter back into the envelope. "Fine," I called back, my voice unnaturally high. Just dropped my coffee. As I bent to clean up the mess, my mind raced. Who was Lydia, and why was she writing such intimate letters to my husband? The sound of Mike's footsteps on the stairs jolted me back to reality. I hastily shoved the envelope into my apron pocket just as he appeared in the doorway. "Geez, Rach, what happened?" He surveyed the scene, his brow furrowed. I forced a smile. "Butterfingers, I guess. Don't worry, I've got it under control." Mike shrugged, already losing interest. "All right, I'm heading out. Big meeting today." As he turned to leave, I blurted out, "Who's Lydia?" He froze, his back to me. For a moment, the only sound was the drip of the coffee maker. Then he slowly pivoted, his face a mask of confusion. "Lydia? I don't know any Lydia." The lie hung between us, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to scream, to confront him with the evidence burning a hole in my pocket. But something held me back. Maybe it was the fear of what would happen if I did. Or maybe it was the sudden realization that I needed more information before I made my next move. "Oh," I said lightly, "must have been thinking of someone else. Have a good day, honey." Mike's shoulders visibly relaxed. He gave me a quick peck on the cheek and headed out the door. As soon as I heard his car pull away, I sank to the floor, my back against the kitchen island. The letter felt like it was searing my skin through the fabric of my apron. With shaking hands, I pulled it out and read it again, hoping I'd somehow misunderstood. But the words were clear. "My dearest Mike, last night was magical. I can't wait to see you again." The rest of the letter was a blur of intimate details and future plans. Plans that didn't include me or our daughter, Amelia. The shrill ring of the phone startled me out of my daze. I scrambled to my feet, composing myself before answering. "Rachel, it's your mother-in-law." Mrs. Grant's crisp voice cut through the line. "I trust you remember the charity luncheon this afternoon?" I closed my eyes, suppressing a groan. "Of course, Mrs. Grant, wouldn't miss it." "Excellent, and do make sure Amelia is properly dressed this time. Last month's ensemble was questionable at best." I bit back a retort. "Yes, Mrs. Grant, we'll be there." As I hung up, a wave of rebellion washed over me. Why was I still jumping through hoops for this woman? Why was I pretending everything was fine when my world was crumbling around me? The ding of my laptop interrupted my spiraling thoughts. A notification from my online store, another sale of my handcrafted jewelry. Despite everything, a small smile tugged at my lips. My little business, started as a hobby, was beginning to flourish. As I packaged up the order, an idea began to form. Maybe it was time to stop playing by everyone else's rules. Maybe it was time to take control of my own destiny. I glanced at the clock. The luncheon was in 2 hours. Just enough time to set my plan in motion. Picking up my phone, I dialed a number I'd sworn I'd never use. "Hello, is this divorce attorney Johnson's office? I'd like to schedule a consultation." As I hung up, a mix of fear and exhilaration coursed through me. The game was about to change, and this time, I was making the rules. The charity luncheon was in full swing, a sea of pastel suits and pearls. I smoothed down Amelia's dress, silently praying it would meet Mrs. Grant's exacting standards. "Rachel, darling." Mrs. Grant's voice cut through the chatter. "There you are. And Amelia, well, I suppose that dress will have to do." I bit my tongue, forcing a smile. "Hello, Mrs. Grant." Amelia picked it out herself. Mrs. Grant's lips tightened. Did she now? Well, perhaps it's time we had a talk about proper attire for young ladies. Before I could respond, she whisked Amelia away, leaving me alone in a crowd of Mike's relatives and business associates. I felt like a fish out of water, my mind still reeling from the morning's discovery. "Rachel," a shrill voice called out. I turned to see Aunt Mildred waving me over. "Come, dear. We were just discussing the upcoming family reunion." I reluctantly joined the group, my stomach churning. Family reunion? This was the first I'd heard of it. "Oh yes," Aunt Mildred continued, oblivious to my discomfort. "It's going to be quite the affair, a week-long celebration of the Grant family legacy." A week? I echoed, my voice weak. Mrs. Grant suddenly materialized beside me. Of course, dear. Didn't Mike tell you? It's been in the planning for months. I swallowed hard, anger bubbling up inside me. No, Mike hadn't told me, just like he hadn't told me about Lydia. I'm afraid we won't be able to make it, I heard myself say. The words hung in the air, heavy with defiance. Mrs. Grant's eyes narrowed. Nonsense. This is a family obligation. You and Amelia will be there. Actually, I said, my voice growing stronger, Amelia has a school project that week. It's very important for her grade. The lie tasted sweet on my tongue. For once, I was taking control. Mrs. Grant's face darkened. Rachel, I don't think you understand. This reunion is not optional. The entire family will be there, including the board members of Mike's company. Your absence would be noticed. The threat in her voice was clear. I opened my mouth to argue further, but a commotion across the room caught my attention. Amelia was standing by the dessert table, tears streaming down her face as she furiously wiped at a large stain on her dress. I rushed over, my heart pounding. Amelia, sweetie, what happened? I'm sorry, Mom, she sobbed. I didn't mean to. The punch just spilled and... It's okay, honey, I soothed, grabbing napkins to dab at the stain. Accidents happen. Mrs. Grant's voice cut through the moment. Well, I suppose this is what happens when children aren't properly taught etiquette. I whirled around, my patience finally snapping. That's enough. Amelia is a child, not one of your society puppets. She doesn't need your criticism or your outdated rules. The room fell silent, all eyes on us. Mrs. Grant's face turned an alarming shade of red. How dare you speak to me like that, she hissed. After everything we've done for you. Done for me? I laughed bitterly. You mean controlling every aspect of my life? Dictating how I should dress, act, raise my daughter? I grabbed Amelia's hand, suddenly feeling lighter than I had in years. We're leaving, and we won't be at your reunion. As we walked out, I could hear the whispers starting behind us, but for once I didn't care what they thought. In the car, Amelia looked at me with wide eyes. Mom, are we in trouble? I took a deep breath, realizing the magnitude of what I'd just done. No, sweetie, we're not in trouble. We're just making some changes. As I drove home, my phone buzzed incessantly. Texts from Mike, voicemails from Mrs. Grant. I ignored them all. Instead, I focused on the road ahead, my mind racing with possibilities. It was time to start living life on my own terms. And the first step? Finding out exactly who this Lydia was. The days following the charity luncheon were a whirlwind of tense silence and barely concealed hostility. Mike's cold shoulder was a stark contrast to Mrs. Grant's incessant phone calls, which I steadfastly ignored. Amelia, caught in the crossfire, grew increasingly withdrawn. One evening, as I sat at my crafting table, meticulously beading a necklace for an online order, Amelia's small voice broke the silence. Mom, why is everyone so angry? I set down my tools, turning to face her. Sometimes, sweetie, grown-ups have disagreements, but it's not your fault, okay? She nodded, unconvinced. Is it because of the luncheon, because I spilled punch on my dress? My heart clenched. No, honey, it's much more complicated than that. Just then, Mike stormed into the room, his face thunderous. Rachel, we need to talk. Now. I glanced at Amelia, who had shrunk back at her father's tone. Sweetie, why don't you go upstairs and start your homework? I'll be up soon. As soon as Amelia was out of earshot, Mike exploded. What the hell were you thinking, embarrassing my mother like that? Do you have any idea what you've done? I stood my ground, anger bubbling up inside me. What I've done? How about what you've done, Mike? Or should I ask Lydia about that? The color drained from his face. What are you talking about? I laughed bitterly. Don't play dumb. I found the letters. How long has it been going on? Mike's shock quickly morphed into defensiveness. That's none of your business. What I do in my private time. None of my business, I interrupted, my voice rising. I'm your wife. Amelia is your daughter. How dare you? Keep your voice down, Mike hissed, glancing nervously at the stairs. Look, what's done is done. But you need to fix things with my mother. The family reunion is important for my career. I stared at him, incredulous. Your career? Is that all you care about? Before he could respond, my phone pinged. Another sale notification from my online store. Despite everything, a small smile tugged at my lips. Mike's eyes narrowed. What's that? Another order for your little hobby? The condescension in his voice was the final straw. It's not a hobby, Mike. It's a business. My business. And it's doing quite well, actually. He scoffed. Please, those trinkets you make? That's not a real job. Something inside me snapped. No? Well, this hobby of mine made more last month than your precious job did. The shock on Mike's face was almost comical. What? That's impossible. I pulled out my phone, showing him the sales figures. His eyes widened in disbelief. I don't need your money anymore, Mike, and I certainly don't need your mother's approval. Just then, Amelia's voice floated down from upstairs. Mom, can you help me with my math homework? I turned to go, but Mike grabbed my arm. This conversation isn't over, Rachel. You can't just walk away from your family obligations. I wrenched my arm free. Watch me. As I climbed the stairs, my mind was racing. I knew this was far from over. Mrs. Grant wouldn't let go without a fight, and Mike, well, Mike had made his priorities clear. I paused outside Amelia's room, taking a deep breath to compose myself. As I pushed open the door, I made a silent vow. No matter what it took, I would protect Amelia from this toxic environment, even if it meant leaving everything behind. Amelia looked up as I entered, her eyes wide with worry. Mom, is everything okay? I forced a smile, sitting down beside her. Everything's going to be fine, sweetie. Now, let's take a look at that math homework. As we bent over her textbook, I couldn't shake the feeling that a storm was brewing. But for the first time in years, I felt ready to face it head-on. The afternoon sun streamed through the kitchen window as I put the finishing touches on a custom-ordered bracelet. The house was quiet, a rare moment of peace in the chaos that had become our lives. I glanced at the clock, realizing Amelia would be home from school soon. As if on cue, I heard the front door slam. But instead of Amelia's usual cheerful greeting, I was met with the sound of muffled sobs. Amelia? I called out, my heart racing as I rushed to the entryway. My daughter stood there, her backpack on the floor, tears streaming down her face. Mom, she choked out, I saw. I pulled her into my arms, stroking her hair. Shh, it's okay. Take a deep breath. What did you see? Amelia pulled back, her eyes red and puffy. I went to surprise Dad at his office. But he was with someone. A woman. They were kissing. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I knew about Lydia, of course, but hearing it from Amelia, seeing the pain in her eyes, it was a whole new level of betrayal. Oh, sweetheart, I whispered, fighting to keep my voice steady. I'm so sorry you had to see that. Amelia's sobs turned to hiccups. Why would Dad do that? Doesn't he love us anymore? The question pierced my heart. How could I explain something I didn't understand myself? Your father loves you very much, I said, choosing my words carefully. Sometimes adults make mistakes, big mistakes. Amelia's eyes narrowed. You knew, didn't you? That's why you and Dad have been fighting. I nodded, unable to lie. I found out recently. I was trying to figure out how to tell you. Were you going to tell me at all? Amelia's voice was sharp, accusatory. The question caught me off guard. Of course I was. I wanted to protect you. Protect me? Amelia scoffed, suddenly sounding much older than her years. By lying to me? By pretending everything was fine. Her words hit me like a physical blow. Had I been so caught up in my own pain that I'd failed to see what was right in front of me? Before I could respond, the front door opened again. Mike walked in, his face falling as he took in the scene before him. What's going on? He asked, his voice wary. Amelia whirled to face him, her grief turning to anger. I saw you. With her. How could you do that to Mom? To us? Mike's face drained of color. Amelia, I can explain. No, I cut in, my voice steely. You don't get to explain. Not now. I turned to Amelia. Sweetie, why don't you go up to your room? I need to talk to your father. For a moment I thought she might refuse, but then she nodded, grabbing her backpack and heading upstairs. The slam of her bedroom door echoed through the house. Mike and I stood in silence, the weight of years of lies and resentment hanging between us. Rachel, he started, I never meant for Amelia to find out like this. I laughed bitterly. Oh, and how exactly did you mean for her to find out, or were you planning on keeping your little affair a secret forever? Mike's face hardened. It's not like that, Lydia. She understands me. She doesn't try to change me like you do. His words ignited a fire within me. Change you? I've spent years molding myself to fit your family's expectations, and this is how you repay me. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. You know what? I'm done. Done pretending, done making excuses, done living this lie. Mike's eyes widened. What are you saying? I met his gaze, my resolve strengthening with each passing second. I'm saying it's over, Mike. I want a divorce." The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. As I watched the shock spread across Mike's face, I realized this was just the beginning. The real battle was yet to come. The word divorce hung in the air like a thundercloud, heavy and ominous. Mike's face cycled through shock, anger, and finally a cold determination that sent chills down my spine. "You can't be serious," he scoffed. "What about Amelia? What about our life together?" I stood my ground, years of pent-up frustration bubbling to the surface. "Our life together? You mean the life where I play the perfect wife while you sneak around with Lydia?" Mike's eyes narrowed. "You have no idea what you're talking about. Lydia understands me in ways you never could." "Oh, I understand plenty," I shot back. "I understand that you're a liar and a cheat, and I'm done pretending otherwise." Just then, Amelia's bedroom door creaked open. We both froze, realizing our voices had risen to dangerous levels. "Mom? Dad?" Amelia's voice wavered. "Are you guys getting divorced?" The pain in her voice cut through me like a knife. I turned to face her, my heart breaking at the sight of her tear-stained face. "Sweetie," I began, but Mike cut me off. "Of course not," he said smoothly. "Your mother's just upset. We'll work things out." I whirled on him, fury coursing through my veins. "Don't you dare lie to her. Not anymore." Turning back to Amelia, I took a deep breath. "Honey, I don't know what's going to happen, but I promise you, no matter what, I'll always be here for you." Mike's phone buzzed, breaking the tense silence. He glanced at it, his face paling. "I have to go," he muttered, heading for the door. "Let me guess," I called after him. "Lydia needs you." The slam of the front door was his only response. Amelia collapsed into my arms, her body shaking with sobs. As I held her, my mind raced. How had we gotten here? How could I protect her from the storm that was surely coming? The next morning, I woke to the insistent ringing of the doorbell. Groggily, I made my way downstairs, only to find Mrs. Grant on my doorstep, her face a mask of barely contained fury. "Rachel," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "We need to talk." Before I could respond, she pushed past me into the house. "I've just had a very interesting conversation with Michael," she began, pacing the living room. "He tells me you're threatening divorce, over some ridiculous notion of infidelity, no less." I felt my anger rising again. "It's not a notion, Mrs. Grant. It's a fact, one that Amelia witnessed firsthand." Mrs. Grant waved her hand dismissively. "Children often misunderstand adult situations, and even if there was some indiscretion, surely you understand the importance of maintaining appearances?" I stared at her, incredulous. "Maintaining appearances? Is that all you care about?" "It's what you should care about," she snapped. "The Grant family name means something in this town. I won't have you dragging it through the mud over some petty marital spat." Something inside me snapped. "Petty? Your son has been cheating on me, lying to me, and you call it petty?" Mrs. Grant's eyes narrowed. "Listen carefully, Rachel. If you go through with this divorce, you'll lose everything. The house, your status, even Amelia. The Grants protect their own, and you're not one of us." Her words hit me like a physical blow. Could she really take Amelia from me? As if sensing my fear, Mrs. Grant pressed on. "Be sensible, dear. Let this foolishness go, and we can all move past it." I stood there, my mind reeling. The thought of losing Amelia was unbearable. But could I really go back to pretending? To living a lie? In that moment, I made my decision. Meeting Mrs. Grant's gaze, I spoke, my voice steady and clear. "Get out of my house." Mrs. Grant's eyes widened in shock. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," I said, my resolve strengthening with each word. "Get out, and tell Mike he can expect to hear from my lawyer." As I watched Mrs. Grant's retreating form, I felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. The battle lines were drawn. Now it was time to fight. The divorce papers felt heavy in my hands as I stood outside Mike's office. My heart raced. But I steeled myself for the confrontation ahead. This was it, the moment of truth. I pushed open the door without knocking. Mike looked up, surprise quickly morphing into annoyance. "Rachel, what are you doing here? I'm in the middle of—" "We need to talk," I cut him off, dropping the papers on his desk. "Now." Mike's eyes flickered to the documents, realization dawning on his face. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious in my life," I replied, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. "It's over, Mike. I want a divorce." He leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing at his lips. "Come on, Rachel. We both know you won't go through with this. What about Amelia? What about our life together?" His dismissive tone ignited a fire within me. Our life together? You mean the lie we've been living? The one where you sneak around with Lydia while I play the perfect wife? Mike's face hardened. You don't understand. Lydia. I don't want to hear about Lydia, I snapped. I want you to face what you've done. To me, to Amelia. Leave Amelia out of this, Mike growled, standing up. She has nothing to do with... She has everything to do with this, I shouted, my composure finally cracking. She saw you, Mike, with Lydia. Do you have any idea what that's done to her? For a moment, genuine shock and remorse flashed across Mike's face, but it quickly disappeared, replaced by a cold determination. I'll talk to her, he said. Explain things. She'll understand. I laughed bitterly. Understand what? That her father is a cheater? That he cares more about his mistress than his family? Mike slammed his fist on the desk. Enough! You have no idea what you're talking about. My relationship with Lydia is... complicated. Oh, I'm sure it is, I retorted, but it's not my problem anymore. Sign the papers, Mike. He glanced at the documents, then back at me. And if I don't? Then I'll see you in court, I said, my voice low and dangerous, and I'll make sure everyone knows exactly why we're divorcing. Mike's face paled. You wouldn't dare. Think about my career, my reputation. Your reputation? I scoffed. That's all you care about, isn't it? Well, guess what? I don't care anymore. Sign the papers. For a long moment, we stared each other down. Then, with a muttered curse, Mike grabbed a pen and scrawled his signature on the documents. There, he spat. Happy now? A wave of relief washed over me, quickly followed by a surge of anxiety. This was really happening. We were really getting divorced. It's not about being happy, I said quietly. It's about doing what's right. For me and for Amelia. As I turned to leave, Mike called out, You'll regret this, Rachel. You have no idea what you're up against. I paused at the door, looking back at him. No, Mike, you have no idea what you're up against. I walked out of his office, my head held high. But as I made my way to my car, Mike's words echoed in my mind. What did he mean? What was I up against? My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Grant. We need to talk. Now. A chill ran down my spine. I had a feeling I was about to find out exactly what Mike meant. As I started the car, I took a deep breath. The real battle was just beginning, and I needed to be ready for whatever came next. Because one thing was certain, I wasn't going down without a fight. The Grant family Christmas gathering loomed before me like an impenetrable fortress. I clutched my purse, containing the damning evidence of Mike's affair, as I stood on the doorstep of the opulent mansion. My heart raced, but my resolve was ironclad. Tonight, everything would change. I rang the doorbell, steeling myself for what was to come. Mrs. Grant answered, her face a mask of false cheer. Rachel, dear, she said, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. We weren't sure you'd make it. I forced a smile. I wouldn't miss it for the world. As I stepped inside, the cacophony of forced laughter and clinking champagne glasses assaulted my senses. I scanned the room, spotting Mike in deep conversation with a group of men I recognized as board members from his company. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross his face. Aunt Mildred bustled over, air-kissing my cheeks. Rachel, darling, where's little Amelia? She's not feeling well, I lied smoothly. In truth, left her with a trusted friend. She didn't need to witness what was about to unfold. As I made my way through the crowd, I overheard snippets of conversation. Such a shame about Rachel and Mike's troubles. Heard she's been difficult lately. Probably just a phase. My blood boiled. They had no idea what was coming. Mrs. Grant clinked her glass, calling for attention. Friends, family, welcome to our annual Christmas celebration. As always, we're so blessed to have you all here. As she droned on about family values and tradition, I felt a presence at my elbow. It was Lydia, looking stunning in a red cocktail dress. Rachel, she said quietly, we need to talk. I turned to face her, my voice low and dangerous. Oh, we'll talk all right, but not just us. Before she could respond, I strode to the center of the room, my heart pounding in my ears. Excuse me, I called out, my voice cutting through the chatter. I have something I'd like to say. All eyes turned to me. Mrs. Grant's face tightened with barely concealed anger. Rachel, dear, this isn't the time. Oh, I think it's exactly the time, I interrupted. You all talk about family values and tradition. Well, let me tell you about the Grant family values. I pulled out the letters from my purse, holding them high. These are love letters, not between a husband and wife, but between a cheating husband and his mistress. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Mike started towards me, his face ashen. Rachel, don't. For years, I continued, my voice growing stronger, I've played the perfect wife. I've smiled and nodded and bent over backwards to fit into this family. But no more. I turned to face Mike and Lydia, who stood frozen in shock. You two deserve each other, but Amelia and I deserve better. Mrs. Grant stepped forward, her voice shrill. That's enough. How dare you cause such a scene? How dare I laughed bitterly. How dare you stand by and watch your son destroy his family? How dare you try to bully me into silence? The room was deathly quiet now, all pretense of festivity gone. I looked around at the shocked faces, feeling a strange sense of liberation. I'm done, I said firmly. Done with the lies, done with the manipulation, done with all of it. Mike, you'll be hearing from my lawyer. The rest of you? Merry Christmas. With that, I turned and walked out, leaving chaos in my wake. As I stepped into the cold night air, I heard the explosion of voices behind me. Accusations, denials, shocked exclamations. I got into my car, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. What had I done? The full weight of my actions began to sink in. I just burned every bridge, exposed every secret. There was no going back now. As I drove away from the Grant mansion, tears streaming down my face, I realized I was laughing. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. Whatever came next, I was ready to face it head on. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. But I'd fired the first shot, and there was no turning back now. 6 months after that fateful Christmas party, I stood in my new workshop, surrounded by the fruits of my labor. Delicate necklaces, intricate bracelets, and stunning earrings filled every surface. My online business had exploded, fueled in part by the publicity from my very public stand against Mike and the Grant family. The bell above the door chimed, and Amelia burst in, her face flushed with excitement. Mom, you won't believe what happened at school today, I smiled, setting down the piece I was working on. What is it, sweetie? Remember that essay contest I told you about? The one about overcoming adversity? Her eyes sparkled. I won first place. They want me to read it at the school assembly next week. Pride swelled in my chest. That's amazing, Amelia. I'm so proud of you. As she chattered on about her plans for the assembly, I marveled at the change in her. Gone was the withdrawn, anxious girl from 6 months ago. In her place stood a confident, vibrant young woman. The shop door opened again, and I tensed instinctively. But it was just Sarah, my new assistant, laden with shipping boxes. Hey, Rachel, she called out. You're not going to believe this. We just got an order for 500 custom pieces for a major department store. I gasped, my mind reeling at the implications. This could be the breakthrough we'd been waiting for. As I helped Sarah unpack, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mike. We need to talk about the custody arrangement. Can we meet? A familiar knot formed in my stomach, but I pushed it aside. I'd faced worse and come out stronger. Everything okay, Mom? Amelia asked, noticing my expression. I smiled reassuringly. Everything's fine, sweetie. Just your dad wanting to talk. Amelia's face clouded briefly, but she nodded. You know, I've been thinking, maybe I could see him sometime, if you're okay with it. Her words caught me off guard. We'd had a rough few months after the divorce, with Amelia refusing to see Mike at all. But now, if that's what you want, we can arrange it, I said carefully. But only if you're sure. Amelia nodded, her expression resolute. I am. I think I'm ready to face him. In that moment, I saw a strength in my daughter that I'd always hoped she'd find. A strength that mirrored my own journey. As we closed up shop that evening, I reflected on the whirlwind of the past 6 months. The bitter custody battle, the attempts by Mrs. Grant to discredit me, the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, wondering if I'd made the right choice. But looking at Amelia now, seeing the success of my business, feeling the love and support of true friends I'd made along the way, I knew I'd made the right decision. Later that night, as Amelia slept peacefully in her room, I sat on our small balcony gazing at the stars. My phone buzzed again, another text from Mike. This time I didn't hesitate. I typed out a response. Yes, we can meet, but on my terms this time. As I hit send, a sense of calm washed over me. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them. No more hiding, no more pretending, No more subjugation. I thought back to that terrified woman who'd found those letters all those months ago. She seemed like a stranger now. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth, who fought for what she believed in, who'd created a life filled with love, respect, and endless possibilities. The future stretched out before me, bright and full of promise. There would be struggles, of course, but I was no longer afraid. I had found my voice, my strength, my true self. And nothing, not Mike, not Mrs. Grant, not anyone, could ever take that away from me again. As the cool night breeze caressed my face, I smiled. This wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. My beginning, our beginning. And I couldn't wait to see what came next.